Okay, folks, it's time. It's time for the Yaira #1 reviews, and this one is entitled Rippaverse Still Has No Editors. Now, Mike, I can already hear you complaining. That can't be true. According to the credits of Yaira #1, there are 4 editors. You've got Andrew Rodriguez as lead editor, Kanan White as lead art editor, Alan Ford as copy editor, and of course Eric July as editor-in-chief. Yeah, but are any of them worth a darn? Well, let's see. Starting with the opening blurb. The opening blurb in a comic is usually one of two things. It can be a quick description of the hero of the comic, the concept of the comic, the hero concept, basically something along the lines of, Peter Parker, bitten by a radioactive spider, soon learns that with great power comes great responsibility. That's one way to do an opening blurb. The other way, and this is the way it's used in Yaira #1, is to kind of catch a reader up on events that have taken place in the past so that the reader can come in from the cold, pretty much, and not have to go back and read prior issues. And that's how this opening blurb is structured. After being told to go away and never return, the Except, known only as Yaira, has reappeared, but this time in Florispark. Who she is and what she wants is veiled in mystery. After clashing with Avery and dropping him from a height that would kill a normal man, Yaira must now escape the Alpha Core. Okay, so this is basically trying to get you into page 1 of the comic without you having to go back and read ISOM #1, which is the place from where the opening blurb gets all this information. We see in ISOM #1 how Yaira has returned to Florispark 2 weeks ago. After 2 weeks, she's confronted by Alpha Core, who reminds her that she was told not to come back. She also encounters Avery Silman, the retired superhero formerly known as ISOM, and drops him from a great height so that he falls onto a taxi or yellow car right in front of Alpha Core. So all of that opening blurb information, it comes from ISOM #1, and the idea is that if you've never read ISOM #1, you should be able to hit the ground running knowing what you know now. But is that true? I mean, who is this blurb really written for? And the reason I ask that is because the people who have read ISOM #1 are going to understand things in this blurb that the people who have not read ISOM #1 are going to understand. For example, who's Avery? I mean, why should a person who has not read ISOM #1 have any idea who this Avery person is? I mean, Avery is ISOM. Why don't you just call him ISOM? You have the name ISOM. It's one of your book's names. Why can't you use it? I mean, come on now. It's almost like there's something that's restricting you from using the name ISOM, and so you have to use the name Avery instead, or else you're going to incur some kind of penalty or something. I don't know. It's just really weird. I don't know why. In describing what happened between Yaira and Avery prior, Eric July just doesn't use the name ISOM. So anyway, you got Avery here. Nobody's going to know who Avery is if they're coming in cold. They're not even going to know who or what Florispark is. They don't. How are they supposed to know that's a city in Texas, a fictional city in Texas? Person coming in from the cold isn't going to know what Alpha Core is either. So who is this blurb really written for? Is it just written to remind people who read ISOM #1 of what happened in that book? Or is this really supposed to catch somebody up who is coming in just absolutely flat cold? I don't think it works very well in the latter sense. And it doesn't particularly work all that great in the former sense either. It doesn't work great for either people who have not read anything before or who are familiar with the books, because let's look at this problem. Never return to where? We hear that Yaira has reappeared, but this time in Florispark. Well, where did she appear before? She was told to go away and never return. I assume that she was told to go away and never return to the place where she's reappeared, which would be Florispark. When Brian Solari is confronting her and saying, you were told not to come back, and they're in Florispark, I'm assuming that the place that she was not told to come back to is Florispark. I mean, where else would it have been? And if it's some city other than Florispark that they first encountered each other, well, he never told her not to come back to Florispark, so what's his beef? Now, the only other thing that I could think of is, well, maybe he told her not to come back to Texas, generally speaking. But nobody who read ISOM #1 read that sentence that way. If that's what he meant, he should have said that explicitly so that we, the readers, would have known that. So, yeah, this is all kind of messed up. Also, known only as Yaira? I mean, excuse me, but I read ISOM #2, and I happen to know that she has another identity. She actually is a consultant named Sally, don't know her last name yet, but she works for Lincoln Eusebio at Projexis, so she's not known only as Yaira. I mean, come on, if you want to bring together both old readers and new readers and be able to hit the ground running with this particular blurb, you're going to need something that's like this. Dr. Sally Rodell, a consultant working for the Mammoth Corporation Projexis, is also the mysterious ice-controlling except known as Yaira. 2 weeks ago, Yaira ended her years-long exile and returned to Florispark, Texas. What Yaira wants, what she is still unknown, but all may be revealed after her brutal treatment of retired superhero Avery Silman brings her into conflict with her old nemesis Brian Solari and his fellow supercops in Alpha Corps. See, this gives pretty much all of the information that a reader could need, whether from ISOM, coming from ISOM #1 and #2, or just coming in from the cold. You can pretty much figure out everything you need to know to get into the first page of the book, which starts here. Now, this is the first page, and it starts with people pointing at the sky, looking up into the sky, and Avery Silman, we can presume, falls out of the sky onto this car, and then Yaira floats above him saying, "Do not follow me," and then flies off. Okay, if you've read ISOM #1, this scene is going to be problematic right away. Reason being that in ISOM #1, Yaira dropped Avery and just flew off. She didn't descend later. In fact, she dropped him and he fell and hit the car right in front of Alpha Corps, who were right there at the time he hit the car. So if she actually is hovering over him after he's hit the car, then one of two things must be true. Either this is a retcon of some point, in which she actually had time to come down and tell Avery, "Do not follow me," and then fly off, and then Alpha Corps arrive. Or Yaira's a freaking idiot, and she actually came down out of the sky while Alpha Corps was there around the car to tell Avery, who is the only person we see on the panel, so that's the person we naturally think she's going to be talking to. She tells Avery, "Don't follow me," and she's put herself in range of Alpha Corps, which is stupid. I mean, the whole point of dropping him like that is to, create a distraction so she can get away. Why in the hell would you come down and hover over the guy and when it just puts you in range of your enemies? So, either this is a retcon, and we're already having retcons in the Rippaverse, or Yaira is stupid. Which is it? Well, you turn the page and you find out Yaira is stupid. Alpha Corps actually is there, and she's put herself within range. There's Braxwell on top. He's checking Avery Silman, who for some reason does not have facial hair. So there's a goober right there. And then Brian Solari says that Ingrid and I will pursue Yaira. Now, this is flat-ass in contradiction to what we read in ISOM #2, those of us who read ISOM #2, where Brian Solari tells Ingrid Valdez, "I did not simply let Yaira go this time. Braxwell and I went in pursuit after she nearly killed that man. I engaged all aerial communications and she has disappeared." Okay, so in ISOM number 2, Solari explains to Ingrid Valdez that Braxwell and him went after Yaira. But in Yaira number 1, it's Ingrid and him who go after Yaira, and Braxwell's the one who stays behind. Now, this is problematic because the Soska sisters who wrote Yaira number 1 are also supposed to be the keepers of the lore. They're the ones who are supposed to make sure that continuity errors don't happen. And here they just wrote a doozy right into their own damn book. Oh, man. Now, I will say that I do think I have a solution where we can use the ISOM number 2 stuff to explain something that happens later on, but we'll have to get to that part later. It's not a complete disaster, but it nearly was. Alright, so now we have Solari doing his Man of Steel thing, where he crouches on the ground before flying up into the sky. And he tells Valdez, "I'll catch up." And Valdez says, And then he throws her at Yaira, and she just says, "Oh," and then reaches out with a lasso and ropes Yaira by the throat. Okay, I didn't copy these panels to show you anything wrong. There's nothing actually wrong here. But there is a humongous missed opportunity in that, the Soska sisters had to have read the script by Chuck Dixon about Alpha Core. And so they should have had a much deeper understanding of these characters than they appear to at this point. Because what you don't see in these panels is any kind of banter between Ingrid Valdez and Solari that would be, number 1, entertaining, and number 2, true to the characterizations given by Chuck Dixon in Alpha Core number 1. I would expect to see something in here like, "Sorry, I hate being a passenger." And then he says, "Oh, really? Well, it's time to get off." And then she says, "What?" And then he throws her, and she says, "Hey!" Like, "Solari, you... All right, I better make this count." And then she goes and ropes Yaira. But that would at least show a sense of playful banter between the two of them, given the fact that they don't really like each other. There's a little bit of... You get to experience their personalities better. And so they just kind of passed this on by and went for straight-up action, and it's just kind of dull. Now we get to the artist trying to be creative, where you have all sorts of panel layering going on, which is a bunch of BS most of the time. And then you have this freaking, bar down the center, or the horizontal bar going through these leftmost panels, and also got a horizontal bar going through this, where there's no difference in the panels. Why are you separating panels from themselves? These are single panels. It's like every freaking artist out there has to feel like, I'm going to get creative. I'm looking at this, and I feel like I'm looking at Deadpool doing a break the fourth wall thing, because he's pulling Yaira from one panel into another. This is garbage. Stop fucking around and just tell the story. It is not your job to be the next great to find the next great artistic innovation. Just be a storyteller. You can tell the story so much more clearly without those stupid lines. Okay, you've got all of your information right here presented to the reader in a much more carefully packaged form, and now we can move on. I just hate it when these artists decide, yeah, I'm going to get creative, and I don't actually care about the story. I'm just going to see how many gimmicks I can put into the book. So Valdez and Solari are swept by Yaira up into the upper atmosphere, and Solari spouts the sage wisdom, "Hold your breath," which of course means he's not holding his. And she says, "I told you not to follow me," which means that she was talking to Alpha Core on the first page where Alpha Core was not visible. That's just poor storytelling. In the next sequence of panels, you have Ingrid Valdez keeping her eye on Yaira, presumably to rope her again, and then Yaira suddenly disappears. Except you've got this blue streak of light on the horizon, and I'm like, okay, Does that mean she either flew all the way to the horizon and back, or that she flew around the planet entirely just to come and kick Ingrid Valdez in the stomach? In which case, I would expect Ingrid Valdez to be in 2 pieces or more if she's going to be going that fast. I mean, come on. What even is this? Now Yaira is dealing with Solari, and he says, "Now what, Yaira? You keep chasing me like this, Brian, and I'm going to start thinking you like me." And then she kisses him, and I'm just like, oh, this is gross now. Because not only is this a little bit sexual assaulty, but it's like, Solari's, well, if you've read Alpha Core, you know Solari's kind of a goober, and that Yaira's slumming by kissing him. But the other thing is just, this is so much more like Black Widow and a woman throwing her sexuality around instead of throwing her power around. I mean, that was one of the things I liked about Yaira in ISOM #1, was that she did not exude sexuality. She was cute. I mean, it's not that she was not an unattractive woman, but she wasn't played as an attractive woman. She was played as a powerhouse. And when to see her, I guess, stoop like this makes me lose respect for the character. I mean, she's already lost IQ points just for putting herself within range of Alpha Core when she didn't need to. But now she's losing respect from me because she's pulling this kind of garbage. Now, she's also sucking the air right out of his lungs. And by the way, this is the first time any kind of caption occurs in the comic, which tells me that basically nobody could understand what the hell's going on in this scene, and they had to add this caption in order to make it clear. This is not the first time I've seen this happen. This happened with Ethan Van Sciver's Cyberfrog Wrecked Planet when Lily, Heather Swain's daughter, screams, and Bill Willingham gave him notes saying, "I don't know why she screams." And so Ethan Van Sciver had to add these particular captions in order to make it more understandable. So that happens sometimes. But, alright, what happens from here? Because this is where the scene ends. The atmosphere shifts and Solari feels the air escape from his lungs. And we get nothing. I mean, does she leave them up there to die? Because that's where they're at this point. I mean, she basically suffocates Solari, and Valdez is suffocating all on her own, and they're floating around, and they're either going to burn up on re-entry or they're going to suffocate up there. So what the heck? I mean, does Yaira take them back down to the ground? We don't see that happen. What happened after that scene? We don't know. We were instead transported to this scene, which you can practically smell the room, and you've got these 4 punks with guns and ammo who look like they're loading up for some reason, and they're commenting on the commentary that's being given by the newscaster, but we don't even know who these people are. These people are just completely out of the blue. And I know that some of them, or at least one of them, is going to factor in pretty prominently later on, but that's only because I've seen things from the previews. But otherwise, all of a sudden, we've had these 4 characters dropped on us for no freaking reason. This is just kind of a bad intro. And moreover, it doesn't explain what happened in the prior scene. Now, this is where I would bring in the information from ISOM #2. Because when Solari says, "Braxwell and I went in pursuit after she nearly killed that man," okay, this is what would make sense. That after Solari and Ingrid got incapacitated up in the stratosphere, that Braxwell flew up there and rescued them. And then, after making sure Valdez was secure, Solari would have revived first, and then Solari and Braxwell could have gone in pursuit after Yaira, and then engaged in all aerial communications, but Yaira disappeared. That's how I would fix things. But what's sad is that I even needed to fix things. I mean, this to me was just a straight up fuck up on the Soska sisters' part, in the exact role that they are supposed to play, which is keepers of continuity, and they just screwed the pooch right away. So let's get back to this, and we'll start looking at the newscaster's commentary. These are terrifying images from today's incident with Yaira. Thank God the Alpha Corps were on site to minimize damage. Okay, we don't need that comma. I'd have hoped for better odds. Solari last fought Yaira to a standstill on his own. You would have thought this would have been an easy fight. Okay, you would have thought this would have been an easy fight. We know from the "I'd" up above that contractions are allowed. Let's use one here to break up the repetition. You'd have thought this would have been an easy fight. And now the newscaster contradicts himself. You'd have thought this would have been an easy fight. There is no easy fight with Yaira. You see, what I think happened here is that there's actually two newscasters who were supposed to have been drawn in the same scene, and they're talking to each other. But because the artist came back and only drew one newscaster, all of the dialogue had to be given to that one newscaster, and it didn't, and nobody noticed that the newscaster was suddenly contradicting himself. You need to have some sort of transition, such as, you'd have thought this would have been an easy fight, but it seems there is no easy fight with Yaira. And yada yada from there. Now you've got Solari breaking in, and here he makes probably one of the worst heel moves I've ever seen from a supposedly heroic comic book character. Okay, that's enough. This isn't a TV spot for Yaira. Okay, obviously he's showing vanity now. I can fend off the likes of Yaira on my own easily. I have before and I will again, but I'm not alone anymore now, am I? Oh, really? So you're blaming the fact that you have teammates for your failure to capture Yaira, as if, you could have done it alone if you just hadn't had to worry about them, especially about Ingrid Valdez. Correct me if I'm wrong, dude, but wasn't it your screw-up that freed Yaira in the first place? I mean, Ingrid Valdez was basically choking Yaira out, and then you came along and yanked her away from Valdez, and that was what gave Yaira the upper hand, where she could use her weather powers to send y'all up into space. So he screwed up, and he's throwing Ingrid Valdez, and presumably Braxwell too, under the bus. And I'm just looking at this, and I'm starting to come around to something that Ethan Van Sciver said a while back. And that's that there are no likable characters in the Rippaverse. Now, I'm still partial to Avery Stillman. I still think he's a basically decent character, if confused and not always thinking straight. Altona, she's generally a good character. So I don't think the Rippaverse is completely devoid of good characters, of characters you can feel good about. But boy, it really has very, very few. And most of its heroes are indeed jerks. I mean, Yaira comes across as a jerk. You got Ingrid and Solari coming across as jerks. Even Braxwell, though he rarely says anything, comes across as pretentious because he could talk if he wanted to, because he does sometimes. And then you've got Gooding. I mean, he's a nice guy, but he's pushy as hell. So there are just all of these different ways in which all of these characters' flaws just dominate them. And of course, Brian Solari is a huge idiot in Alpha Corps #1. So to see him, preening like this is just sickening, and it turns you against Solari as a character. This is not a fight between two heroes anymore. This is more of a fight between this rogue called Yaira and this, I don't know, jackboot enforcer called Solari. It's not an entertaining book at that point if you can't find a side to root for. So, now we come to a scene which really, it uses a trope that I've seen too many times, which is the multiple monitor trope. She's watching CNN on 9 different monitors. I'm sorry, the only time you ever in real life watch the same program on 9 different TVs is if you're TV shopping and trying to compare them. Alright? In this particular case, she should just have it either all up across all 9 monitors, the same image, or she should just have the image up on one monitor. It is ridiculous to show this on all 9. I mean, it's just, nobody's going to watch that. Now, sometimes this can be used to good effect, if you, especially if the image that you're showing multiple times is something that is offensive to the person who is watching it. So, for example, you've got Amazing Spider-Man 389, the closing scene in which the Green Goblin on video is tormenting Spider-Man, and the fact that he's got all these multiple images saying the same word over and over again is just more and more tormenting to him. So that is a good use of the multiple monitor trope. But if you're going to use multiple monitors anywhere else, like in this kind of Batcave-ish scene, you need to have multiple things on the monitors. Or else you have to have some sort of, offensive image of some sort that you're showing to somebody to get a rise out of them. But you don't have this just some banal thing on 9 different monitors. I mean, nobody does that. And you really want to not strain the bounds of credulity beyond what you have to for a comic book. I mean, yes, people have ice powers, but do people watch 9 TVs at once? Generally, no. So this is actually the panel that convinced me that Rippaverse still has nobody worth calling an editor. Because there's no way in hell you are going to send a book to print if you are the editor on this book and have the mistake I'm going to show you in there. First, there's just a minor typo where she says, "Wow, exciting stuff. Now, on to the scene earlier this week." It should be "on to the scene earlier this week." 2 words, on to. When Projexis welcomed its newest member, the highly controversial and equally highly acclaimed, and then Solari breaks in and says, "We will find you and we will bring you to justice." And you will have a comma there. Now, this interruption, if it was, kind of a comical, I'm coming in, I'm breaking in, you're trying to move on, but I'm going to get this one last line in before we go, and then the next page is going to be something wholly other, that would be fine. But what Solari is doing here is actually interrupting an actual transition, because on the next page, you have the words being spoken by the newscaster continued by Lincoln Eusebius on the next page. So Solari's words are coming right in the middle. Now, we've got some cleanup to do on the bottom as well. Biologist and archaeologist, who we feel, it should be whom we feel, is going to be an undeniable asset here at Projexis, period. Won't you please join me in welcoming to our team, ... Okay, so now all that's fixed. But the point is that on this page, you've got text, dialogue text, bleeding over from one page into the next and completely interrupted by the text on the right-hand side. This is just a total fuck-up. You should not have Solari interrupting right in the middle of that. And what's really sad is that the way to fix this is so simple. There you go, it's all fixed. We will find you, and we will bring you to justice. Wow, exciting stuff. Now, on to the scene earlier this week when Projexis welcomed its newest member, the highly controversial and equally highly acclaimed biologist and archaeologist, whom we feel is going to be an undeniable asset here at Projexis. Won't you please join me in welcoming to our team? And let me explain why this is important, why you can't have that interruption there that was on the previous page. You need this to flow. Why? Because of this. Earlier this week, we're actually going back in time when we turn the page. And if Solari jumps in and breaks that stream of thought, the reader's not going to remember that. The reader's going to remember that Solari broke in here and then, okay, well, I guess this somehow links together with the dialogue from the first thing. But then you lose the sense that you're actually looking back on an earlier event in the week. It is important to keep these 2 dialogue balloons together and have them flow together so that when the reader comes here, the reader understands that this is actually a segment from earlier in the week, because no timestamp is given on these pages. Now, as for the press conference itself, As for the press conference itself, it's pretty much wrote a copy of what was in the Yaira live-action trailer. It looks like all of the dialogue that was in that trailer was lifted almost directly from pages of Yaira. So all of that is fine. The only thing being is that I keep hearing these freaking words in the cursed accent of Morgan Boot that she affected for the Yaira live-action trailer. And I really, really wish I didn't. I would just like to be able to read, to hear these words in my head in a normal voice instead of in that butchered Icelandic accent. But as far as punctuation goes, the punctuation is fine, except for these three items. I would actually put a colon at the end of triumphant echoes from the past, because what is in the next dialogue balloon, the smaller dialogue balloon in the second panel, are those triumphant echoes from the past, and those are going to be in quote marks. So this is how that should appear. Other than that, nothing to say about the remainder of it, but my God, people, you've got to up your game. You had, especially this particular problem, where you needed to shift this around. I mean, I would have put my foot down and said, you're not printing the book with this screw up in there. You can't break the flow, and the fix is so easy, there's no excuse not to do it. And I just can't believe that out of all of the people on this list, there is nobody capable of seeing this kind of stuff. You know, Eric is always talking about how, you know, Kanan White came on board. Man, he's taken Deborah Carey-Taw's art up to the next level. He's really upped her game and all that. Well, y'all need to up your game. Because although I will say that this book has a feeling that it's tighter than the Rippaverse books that have come out before, which is an indicator of improvement, it is still not at a level of sufficient quality to be worthy of respect. So get on the ball trying to figure this stuff out. Watch my videos, see the kinds of things that you missed both in this Yaira #1 video and in previous Rippaverse videos. See what you're supposed to be looking for. Get someone who understands English punctuation. Get someone who understands, you know, how to check for words. Hire a proofreader if you need one. And hire someone who actually knows how to edit comic books, because I still don't think you have that person in your arsenal yet. So that is my review of Yaira #1. Rippaverse still has no editors. This is the first of what will be a few, I hope, review videos. And I'm going to stop here because we're getting into a lot of text and a lot of new concepts being introduced, it looks like, in the next section of Yaira #1. And I want to be able to treat that as its own separate subject. So, thank you for watching. Please be on the lookout. Do subscribe so that you'll be notified of when my next Yaira review comes out, and any of my other videos. I've got a particularly funny short exposing an epic trolling by one of Styx Hexenhammer's followers. Styx Hexenhammer is a co-host on The Quartering, and he got trolled massively by one of his followers into dissing Eric July. And also I show you my proof of ownership of Yaira #1, where I show you not only the reading copy I'm using, but the copy that I'm shredding for scans. So you can see that on there. So there's plenty of stuff on my channel to watch for, and I hope you will become a subscriber if you're not already. And I will talk to y'all later.